Hello, friends of the European spirit. In this talk, I'd like to address the significance of Odysseus in Plato's Politeia in the so-called Republic. Now, you may be amazed to hear that Plato has very good things to say, and that includes Socrates. They've got very good things to say on Odysseus, because you may have heard that Plato just outright bans the poets, and especially Homer, for confusing and seducing the youth and corrupting them, etc. But that is a completely cartoonish misunderstanding of Plato, and just shows that whoever transmits such things hasn't really read the text, because in fact Odysseus is one of the heroes of Plato's Politeia. My name is Johannes Niederhauser. I have a PhD in philosophy, and now I'd like to turn to Book 10 of Plato's Politeia and relate to you the myth of and the role that Odysseus plays in it. Now, I won't go into detail on the myth of which ends the entire book. I do that in great detail in my course on Plato's Politeia, which I'll link to in the description of this video. If you'd like to go through book by book, all 10 books of the Politeia together with me, I recorded all the lectures in Athens and in Delphi, mind you, then do take the course for self, study, and read the text with some guidance from me. So let's turn to the myth of briefly. This might be one of the instances in which Plato invents a myth. He is a myth maker after all. He's as much a philomythos as he is a philosophos. And is the son of Armenius, we are told, a Pamphylian by birth. He was slain in battle, and 10 days afterwards, when the bodies of the dead were taken up already in a state of corruption, his body was found unaffected by decay and carried away home to be buried, Plato tells us. And on the 12th day, as he was lying on the funeral pile, he returned to life and told them what he had seen in the other world. And so here what we learn is that Plato wants to justify, wants to show the significance of being good, of being just in life, and what that yields in the afterlife, or rather in the other world, in that moment in between after death, when the soul is freed, and when the soul chooses, however, to be reborn. So there is here clearly an eternal recurrence of the same. However, change and memory will be quite important here. So is the one who tells us this story. I'll just briefly read again from Plato's Politeia how this, let's just say, other world is described. Rather, I would rather say this in-between space, the in-between this life and another life, or the previous life and the next life. In the intermediate space, there were judges seated who commanded the just after they had given judgment on them and had bound their sentences in front of them, to ascend by the heavenly way on the right hand. And in like manner, the unjust were bidden by them to descend by the lower way on the left hand. These also bore the symbols of their deeds, but fastened on their backs. And so we go through the spindle of necessity, Ananke, but we also learn that there is a reward for being just or for being unjust in the brief afterlife. But it's not so much so there are judges, yes, but you're not judged forever. You don't go to hell and you don't go to heaven. But the soul is, in a sense, charged with choosing a new life pattern. The Greek for this is a bion paradigmata, or bios paradigmata, life pattern. Paradigm is a word you might know. So a life pattern where you choose, for example, your species, even sex, your origin, whether you're of noble origin or of obscure origin, meaning you can't trace it back, whether you're a politician, let's say, or a private citizen, whether you're famous or infamous or utterly unknown, etc. So all of this is chosen by the soul, given what the soul remembers of its previous existence, of his previous life. And the soul, importantly, also changes with rebirth. So we have here, I think, a very strong description of the eternal recurrence of the same, which shows us that it's not so much an eternal recurrence of the ever same, of the perfectly identical, but that there is change, and that change occurs through the way in which the soul remembers and what it wants to be able to remember after its next life. And so in this intermediate space, we could also bring in maybe the idea that the soul here remembers the forms, etc., but this is not described here. Now, I'll just say again briefly, if you've heard anything about Plato and Homer, what very likely you will have heard if you haven't read the book carefully, Plato's Politeia, that is, you may think that Plato just outright bans all the poets and especially Homer. That is not the case. And Odysseus, again, I'll say this again, is an especially significant hero for Plato. So let's refer to book 4. If you happen to have a good edition of Plato's Republic, there will be the Stephanus pagination on the side. So you should look at page 441b, line 6 onwards. We can see here that Socrates here praises Odysseus. Actually, there's a direct quote from Homer. And he praises Odysseus for something very, very significant. Because Odysseus does not let his thumos, or just his desire, take its course, or his irrational drive, let's say, when he hears his servants spend the night with the suitors who are trying, who've completely in complete disrespect of the sacred law of Xenia. So Odysseus has returned to Ithaca. He chooses to appear as a beggar, so to hide, to conceal himself, to see what is going on at court, to see also what maybe his wife is doing, etc. And hence, in this moment, when he hears that his servants have in some sense given up on him and are disrespecting the man of the house, the patriarch, the king, no less, and not only serve the suitors, but we could almost say they party with them. He, however, has his heart in the right place. He wants to kill them. He has the urge to kill them, but reason wins out. And so what he here shows is that his soul, the taxis of his soul, that is to say, the arrangement of the parts of the soul, are in good, appropriate order. Dikaiosune is the word for that in Greek. It means justice, yes, but it also means appropriate order. And so Odysseus is chosen by Socrates and Plato explicitly as an example of a man who has his soul in the appropriate order, and hence is a just man. Again, this is already in book 4. There will soon be a video that I will link to on this just beneath this video too, on the supposed banning of Homer in Plato's Calypso, and what that amounts to and what Plato actually has to say about Homer. This is not the place to do this here. It's very important to keep in mind that Odysseus is to Plato and to Socrates a hero, and that in fact his mythos, his action, his life, his story is continued here in this living body of mythos. Plato is a myth maker. There is a longer lecture actually here on my channel, which I gave at the University of Cambridge in, I think, January or February of 2024, which I'll link to as well in the description of this video that you can listen to, in which I talk about Plato's mythologia, about how logos only comes alive through mythos in Plato. So now I'd like to read out to you briefly what happens when Odysseus gets to choose his next life, and then also hence how his soul has to change in the next life. And it's striking that we meet not only Odysseus again, but we meet other heroic figures and famous figures. For example, Orpheus. He chooses a life of a swan out of enmity to women, hating to be born of a woman because they had been his murderers. But more important for our endeavors here is that we also hear of Ajax and of Agamemnon. The soul which obtained the 20th lot chose the life of a lion, and this was the soul of Ajax, the son of Telamon, who would not be a man, remembering the injustice which was done him, the judgment about the arm. So we all know that Odysseus wins out against Ajax and gets the arms of Achilles. And by the way, I should mention here, if you'd like to read the Odyssey with me, please follow the link directly underneath this video and take my course on Homer's The Odyssey, which I will offer only in summer of 2026. So I hope to see you there. Ajax, if you can think about it, of course, also someone who suffered greatly from being a hero, but his choice is to not even be human anymore. He chooses a completely different species. He chooses a lion, which ironically is a mirror image, of course, what he tried to be in life as a hero. But, so he still wants to be, let's just put it simply, a kingly figure or of kingly character, and maybe get all the rewards of a lion, of such a figure, but without the trouble of human suffering. This is what Ajax chooses. Agamemnon is next, and he took the life of an eagle, Plato tells us, because like Ajax, he hated human nature by reason of his suffering. And so Agamemnon, when he returns home from the war at Troy, he is killed by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. So we can see here that their suffering, Agamemnon's and Ajax's, leads them to abandon being human, at least for now, altogether. So they choose a different bion paradigmata, a different life pattern immediately, and want to escape human suffering altogether due to what they have chosen. But as you know, being an eagle, that suggests, of course, also that Agamemnon in the next life, because the soul gets to see, at least not in detail what's going to happen, but gets to see the paradigman, the pattern that might unfold in a certain way. And an eagle, of course, symbolizes strength. Also, it's a certain royalty to it, but especially the capacity to see and to hunt from afar. And as such, Agamemnon also doesn't, it seems, fully accept his previous fate and his previous destiny, and doesn't seem to have learned all that much from his suffering and the suffering, of course, that he has caused himself. And you could even say that choosing to be a lion and to be an eagle, in some sense, they still search for glory or some sort of animal kingdom fame, or at least for some sort of rulership. But Odysseus chooses a different life altogether. Let me read this out to you. There came also, and this is very interestingly also again, so on Ajax it was a line, a sentence, on Agamemnon it's just another sentence. But Odysseus, his life, of all the heroes here, Plato describes the longest, and he gives a specific reason for why Odysseus chooses what he chooses, or why the soul of Odysseus chooses what it chooses. There came also the soul of Odysseus, having yet to make a choice, and his lot happened to be the last of them all. Now the recollection of former toils had disenchanted him of ambition, and he went about for a considerable time in search of the life of a private man who had no cares. He had some difficulty in finding this, which was lying about and had been neglected by everybody else. And when he saw it, he said that he would have done he would have done had his lot been first instead of last, and that he was delighted to have it. So he chooses the life of a layman or a private man, of someone who's not in the public eye, who's not famous, who's not a politician, who's not a leader, who's not a ruler, very likely also someone who comes from obscurity, who can maybe trace back his family by 2 generations, maybe 3 at the most, and hence is ignoble, not noble, and will also not be remembered. But it is important that it is his memory. So it's the memory of his soul. So in the Greek, we see here that it's he remembers mnemi of protoron ponon philotimias. So he remembers as a recollection of the previous pain or suffering, or toll as this translation goes, of philotimia, of glory, of ambition, of the love, of honor, to be very close to the Greek. And this is what Odysseus, by recollecting the pain and the suffering that it's caused, doesn't want for the next life. Very importantly, though, his soul can only choose this other next life, this new paradigm, by having gone through the first life. And so in the recurrence of this soul in the next, in which the soul changes, and again, I think this tells us a lot about the eternal recurrence of the same, which we find in Plato already, is that it goes through the first life of Odysseus, or this life of Odysseus of which we know, and then chooses the complete opposite of this life. But only because it has already lived the other life. So in the next life, this memory of the soul, at the very least, will recur in the soul, and will perhaps also play itself out in the choices, in the decisions that the soul makes when it's changed in the next and future existence. And it's interesting also to point out that Odysseus has to look for this soul or life pattern, because it's not easy to find. It's been neglected by everybody else. And so, only when he goes to search for it specifically, and this tells us that the soul of Odysseus has learned from its suffering, from the suffering that it underwent itself, it had to go through, and of course also the suffering that it caused. Let's not forget that it is by ultimately the hand of Odysseus, his idea of the Trojan horse, that wrecks and destroys the entire sacred city of Troy, as we learn in the very first 2 lines of the Odyssey. And so, I'd like to leave you with this and invite you to read texts yourself rather than just repeat what you may have heard. That Plato outright bans Homer and all the rest that comes with that claim. And just take the time, when you actually say something on anything philosophically, you have that thought, take the time to read the text and see that very often we find not only something else or something different, but often the very complete opposite of what public opinion holds about a certain text or a certain thinker. So I'd like to invite you again to take my course on Homer's The Odyssey, the link to which you find in the description of this video, or my course on Plato's Politeia, a very close reading of Plato, which will guide you through all 10 books. And again, I recorded the lectures in Athens and in Delphi. And so, yes, that's, I think, it for now. If you have any questions, leave a comment. I might get back to you. But the best thing to do is to sign up for a course and then leave a comment in the comment section in the lectures, and I'll be sure to respond to those. Thank you very much indeed.